My name's Michelle, and I do social at Tableau. And one reason why I get really excited about social data is because as a data type, it's actually very accessible. Everyone who's on social media actually has access to free downloadable data directly in social media platforms themselves. And that data is actually pretty robust, so you can get some really powerful insights out of it right away. But I think also one of the challenges is it's easy to get started, but social analytics can get really advanced as well. So one of the challenges can be, well, how do you bridge the gap between those basics and the advanced? What are simple steps that you can take sequentially or over time to iterate to build your program no matter what your end goal is? So today we'll be talking about tips for leveling up your social program from the basics. I am going to take the time to go over the basics, where you can download your data, what you can do with it out of the box. But then we'll talk about why you might want to level up from there. I'm going to share my 10 favorite tips for leveling up. And of course, we'll spend plenty of time in Tableau today showing these tips and tricks in action. And I have also published presentation resources that I'll provide a link to as well at the end. So I'll have, screenshots, code snippets, all of that. All right, so let's get started. I mentioned that you can download free data directly in social platforms themselves. So most of the major social platforms offer this free downloadable data. And I've provided screenshots here for where you can actually access those exports. Sometimes they can be a little bit hard to find. So the 4 major platforms here are Facebook, Twitter, Pinterest, and YouTube. And these are the platforms that let you download that data as an Excel file directly in the platform. Now, once you download the data, what does it look like? So what's cool is that these exports oftentimes are formatted in a really similar way. So there's 2 basic structures. The first is that you might have 1 row for every piece of content or post, and then columns that break down engagement metrics for those posts, those pieces of content. And sometimes you get massive amounts of engagement metrics, especially in Facebook. And another way that your data might be formatted is 1 row for every date, and then by day, engagement metrics, like the amount of reach or the number of followers that you have on that day. This data is really, really well suited to doing some pretty awesome stuff in Tableau right away. So this visualization looks at Tableau's Facebook data for our Tableau Facebook page. At the top, the blue is a timeline of when our followers are online through different hours of the day. And the orange represents the number of posts we've actually sent at that time. Below that is a bar chart that shows the content we posted at that time. And there's plenty of ways that we can slice and dice this data, for instance, looking at different engagement metrics. So this view is very interactive, and so you can do quite a bit with your data right out of the box. So if these basics are actually kind of powerful, why would you want to do more? Well, I really think there's 3 key reasons why you'd want to level up from here. The first is pretty simple. You like what you're doing, you like the insights you're getting, but you don't want to be updating data in Excel. Analytical depth might be another reason. You're not quite getting answers to all the questions that you have. And last, but definitely not least, you want to make a greater impact with your data. So given that, I'd like to share my 10 favorite tips for accomplishing just that. I'm going to start with tips that are more general Tableau tips to help you make the most out of the characteristics of social media data. And then I'm going to share some tips for data sources themselves, how you can level up the raw information you're working with. And I want to mention these tips don't go in a certain order. They're not dependent on each other. So you can take one tip, take another tip here and there, and you can iterate in the way that makes sense to you. My first tip is to take the time now to gather historic data. Now, many social media platforms, you can't download data past a certain point. So taking the time now to gather as much historic data as you can will help set you up for success in the future. So for instance, by gathering historic data, you can set yourself up to make sure you can do things like look at your lifetime follower growth versus only being able to see snapshots. My second tip is to do more with your date and time-based data in Tableau. Social media is all about what's happening in real time. So likewise, your social data has a lot of information about date and time. And there's a lot that you can do with date and time right out of the box. But there are a couple of things kind of just beneath the surface that can help you do even more. So for instance, you could look at the most popular times to post throughout the day and also understand how that might vary depending on the weekday. You can also do things like time zone conversions so that you ensure your users are always looking at the right time zone they want to be looking at. Likewise, doing more with text-based data. Social media is also all about conversations, and those conversations are messy. So you get messy text in your data, which is exciting. But how can you do more with that text? So right out of the box, you could be doing things like ranking your top performing posts. But to level up, you could do things like look at the characteristics of the posts themselves, like the call to action they contain, or the structure of the post. And powering that advanced date and text analysis is logical calculations. Logical calculations are an extremely powerful tool for working with your social data. And a classic example is doing things like categorizing your organic content versus your promoted content. This is something, if we're looking at Twitter data and we want to see our top performing posts, we always want to very quickly be able to see if a post was promoted versus organic. And with a logical calculation, we can tell Tableau how to recognize if a post is organic or not, so that we don't have to manually categorize that data. Now, especially for the logical calculations, text, and date, we'll be doing this very in depth in Tableau. My next tip is not glamorous, but it's extremely helpful. It's to take the time now to create naming conventions for your data. If you're working with data from multiple social media data sources, there are some fields that can be kind of problematic. So they could be named inconsistently across data sources, and it can be difficult to tell if you're comparing apples to apples. So some of the common problematic fields are date fields, things like impressions and reach, and engagement metrics, like likes, comments, and shares. And that helps set you up for doing just this, working with multiple data sources together. This is an extremely powerful tip for getting a lot more out of your social data. If you combine multiple sources of social media data, you could be looking at your performance across social media channels and seeing the big picture view. Now, of course, as you've explored your data, chances are you have some important insights that you want to communicate. Designing for interactivity is key for this because social data can contain so much information, like tons of engagement metrics, so many ways that you can slice and dice and explore it. This view has a couple of key interactive design elements to it. So, for instance, it has very user-friendly filters on the right, and it has a tooltip that's formatted in a really clear way with a URL action as well. So this view actually looks at website traffic referred from social media. So a user can click on that tooltip and then go in to see the actual page on our website. So designing for interactivity is really key for having a greater impact with your social data. Now, when it comes to data sources themselves, what are some ways you can level that up? Well, there's two major types of advanced social data. The first is the Web Data Connector. Tableau's Web Data Connector is a tool that allows developers to build connections between Tableau and API-based data. But my favorite thing about the Web Data Connector is the community around it. Developers are out there building connections to API-based data, and then they're sharing them for other people to connect with. So you don't have to be a developer to make use of API-based data with the Web Data Connector. Now, in my presentation resources, I have an index of some Web Data Connectors, specifically for social media data. Here are just a couple of the platforms that you could be getting data from an existing Web Data Connector. The other type of advanced social data is social listening data. And I like to think about social listening as any time that you're looking outside of your own posts and outside of your own content to what's happening around you and in the bigger conversation. So if you're looking at social listening data, you could be doing things like looking at the content on your website and seeing where it's shared, specifically which pieces of content are shared on what social media platforms. We use a tool called BuzzSumo to do that internally. Now, with social listening data, you can also do things like look at live stream data from multiple social media platforms to see what content people are posting across multiple platforms. And DataSift and GNIP are excellent tools for doing just that. At the end of the day, you've worked hard to get some important insights out of your social data. So I urge you to make sure that that work doesn't sit in a silo. Share your data, share your insights. This could be as simple as sharing a workbook with a colleague or with a decision maker. Or it could mean that you're publishing your data sources to Tableau Server or Tableau Online to share them with other people in your department or across your organization. I believe that social media data is useful for more than just a social team and more than just a marketing team. Social data contains insights that can be helpful across the entire business. So my last tip is just that: share your data. And with that, would you guys like to see some of these tips and tricks in Tableau? Awesome. So what I've created here is a dashboard that uses basically all of these tips and tricks in one way or another. And we're going to recreate parts of this dashboard together. First, let me walk you through what you're seeing on the view. And I'm going to start just with the overall structure of the dashboard. So at the top, we have a lifetime timeline. And this looks at data for Tableau Public's Facebook page and Tableau Public's Twitter handle. So our lifetime timeline at the top looks at the number of followers that we have. The blue is Facebook, and the orange is Twitter. at the bottom of that lifetime timeline, we see the dashboard gets broken into two separate columns, which follow that same color scheme. So we have Facebook on the left and Twitter on the right. But across those two different columns, the views on each side mirror each other. They accomplish or answer a similar question. Before we dive into these views, I just want to point out what we see here on the right. We have filters and parameters that allow us to change what's shown on the view. So we could change the date range. We could select different weekdays. So for instance, we could exclude weekends. We could do the same thing for hours as well. This also has a UTC adjustment built in. So I know that the UTC adjustment, or I think it is, where we are here is -5. And then also we can select an engagement metric that's shown on the view. So we have likes as our first engagement metric, and we have shares/retweets as our second. So let's take a look at what happens when we change that. So you'll see some of those views at the bottom filtered. So let's dive into what these views look at. So the first view looks at the performance of calls to action in our social media posts. So it ranks the calls to action by the amount of engagement that they've received. And that engagement is the selected engagement metric from here. So we can change between likes and shares/retweets. And that's going to filter or change for both Twitter and Facebook. And the Twitter view looks at the same thing. Now, when we come to the bottom here, this view, the two views approach it a little bit differently, but they ask kind of a similar question, which is really, when should we be engaging with certain conversations? So what we have here in Facebook, this looks at data from the Tableau web data, or with Facebook web data connector that was built by an SC here at Tableau. And it shows topics that are mentioned in our posts. And then it shows the top 5 most engaging topics across our social media posts. And then on this axis here, you see different hours of the day. So really what you're looking at is the amount of engagement that's driven by posts when we send them at certain times of the day, depending on their topic. Now, Twitter on the right, this looks at data from the Twitter fire hose collected through GNIP. And this looks at, similarly, top most used hashtags when Tableau Public is mentioned. And then it charts the amount of tweets that get sent with that hashtag over time. So a view like this helps us see when people are organically talking about us and a certain topic. So again, the Facebook and the Twitter kind of accomplish that in different ways, but they're really asking, when should we be engaging in certain conversations? All right, so how do we create a view like this? Well, I have here half-built view, and we're going to recreate the missing parts. So the first one we're going to start with is the view that looks at Facebook calls to action. And I'm going to go ahead and open that up. And this connects to our web data connector. As I mentioned, this is a web data connector that connects to Facebook's API. It was built by a sales consultant here at Tableau. And it pulls in data about content that's posted on our Facebook page. And it contains...
Is that available for everybody?
It is, yeah.
But the historical data, where it gets stored?
What's that?
Historical data, where it gets stored?
I don't know off the top of my head, but I can look into it. Yeah, it contains like a certain amount of recent posts. But I don't know how far back it goes.
So in order to have a longer period, you have to have some sort of storage.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So what we have here is a record for each post. And we have information like the author username of that post, the date when it was sent, the message. And then we have engagement metrics like likes and shares/retweets. Well, retweets obviously doesn't apply here, but that's naming things consistently. So what I want to do first is I want to take a look at some top performing posts. So I'm going to take my message field, and I'm going to look at the number of likes they received. We'll go ahead and sort that. And I can see top performing posts by the number of likes that they've received on our Facebook page. But the thing is, this is pulling data from the Facebook API, and it actually contains information about not just the content we post, but the content other people post on our page. So what I want to do is be able to really quickly categorize that, and I can do that with a logical calculation. So I've already created this logical calculation, and we're going to use it in just a moment. But we're going to walk through how this works. So this is an if-then statement, and essentially it says if x, then y on that top line. The x is in orange, y is in green, and then we have the next line, else something else. And then we close it out with end. So essentially we're telling Tableau to check if a certain condition is true. If it is, it's going to categorize that data in a certain way. And specifically, we want to know if the author username of this post is equal to Tableau public, which would be us. So this tells us if our content was posted by us or someone else. So I can take that new field, drag it out onto the view, and filter just by us. And now, if my data updates, I'm never going to have to worry about excluding content by other people. Now, this is helpful, but this is showing me my top performing posts overall. And what I'm really, really interested in is what are the characteristics of these posts? When they're more successful, what characteristics do they have that I know that I can repeat? So I actually have a field called post call to action, and this looks at the call to action contained in the post. And this also is a logical calculation. And this one's longer, but it's similar. So let's walk through exactly what's happening here. So we say, if x, then y, else if x, then y, else if x, then y, etc. So we have a couple of different lines of else ifs, then else, other, and close out the calculation with end. And then in the orange, what we're doing is, rather than simply checking is our author username equal to Tableau public, we're using a contain statement here, which is a really powerful way to search through text-based data. And a contain statement has two parts. It first points to a field, and then it has a string of text. And all it does is it looks at that field, and it searches to see if it has that string of text in it. So what is this calculation doing? Well, it's saying, hey Tableau, check to see if my post message field contains the text check out. If so, I want you to call this check out. And then it has other conditions for other calls to action to check. Yeah?
Two really quick questions. What made you choose those five call to action words?
Yeah. I looked through, and these were like the most engaging ones.
So you were doing some pre-scraping before you?
Yes. Yeah.
Good. And the second question is, as I'm looking at these checkout and enjoy,
Mm-hmm.
you have them case coded. So, but
Yes.
have you, when we did this, I mean, have you uppered or lowered any of them? Or are they all coming in? My concern is that you might be missing out
Yeah.
on lowercase c when checkout is cased like that.
Yeah, and that's an excellent point. So I have some content in the resources that will address that. But there's a couple of different ways you can do that. So for instance, you could have a separate line for each case. But then also we'll talk a little tiny bit about regex, which would be a great way to like search through a string of text, but also like be able to exclude case sensitivities and that sort of thing. We won't have time to like go really deeply into that, although I wish we did. But there's plenty of resources for how to figure that, or how to learn how to do that. But a really, really great way to accomplish that right away is to just have 2 different versions, and that will totally work. All right, so let's bring our new call to action field out onto the view. And we'll go ahead and sort. And we can see that the other call to action is performing the highest. But the thing is, I'm looking at my sum of likes, and I might have, this is probably the one where I've posted the most. So I'm going to go ahead and change this to aggregate by an average and resort it. All right, so in just a couple of minutes, we've done like 2 logical calculations. We've done some advanced textual analysis. So we've basically recreated the view that we have. But there's one more thing I want to do next. I'm looking at likes here, but I also have data on the number of shares that my posts have. And while I could go ahead and change, I want to look at shares instead, I could do that myself. I really want to give control to the user to be able to change the engagement metric that's being shown on the view. And I can do that with a parameter. I have a colleague who described parameters like a knob on an old-fashioned TV, and I love this analogy. You can think about a knob on an old-fashioned TV as something that you reach out and you dial it so that something changes. And the knob itself is the interface that allows you to change something. So if you're dialing from channel 1 to channel 15, you're dialing the knob from 1 to 15. The knob itself is what tells the TV what channel to point to. Now, a parameter in Tableau is an input, a dynamic input. It's your way to create a knob for the user to interact with your view. It's your way to allow them to choose from a list of options or a range of numbers. And I've created a parameter to look specifically at engagement metrics. I'm going to crack that open so we can see how it's built. And I have screenshots in the resources as well for this. So, of course, we start with names, some properties. When you're getting started with parameters, usually you can stick with the default properties at the top here. And then what's important is choosing here where it says allowable values. You can select from a list of options or a range of options. And here I've selected from a list of options. And now I can define a list of options, every option that I want my user to have. So I've given 2 options here. I've called them 1 and 2. But I have the option to create a display name. So of course I've given them more user-friendly display names. So we have likes and shares/retweets. And essentially what I just created is this drop-down here. So the user can open up this drop-down and change between likes and shares. But the thing is that nothing changes on the view when I do that. And the reason why is because I haven't told Tableau what to do with the input itself. So to do that, I need to create a calculated field. And this is the calculated field that allows you to change an engagement metric, or any field that's shown on the view. This has a similar structure to the if-then statements we were looking at, but this is a case statement. Let's walk through each line. So the first, we have case, and then we have something in purple here. The next line, when X, then Y. X in orange, Y in green. Next line, when X, then Y. We could have more options, but we just have 2. And then, of course, we close it out with an end. So what does this do? Well, the first line tells Tableau what it's concerned with, like what do these options apply to? So all I'm saying in the first line is, hey, Tableau, I want you to look for my parameter called engagement metric. Okay, so you're looking at that parameter. So when the user selects option 1 in the parameter, I want you to show the user the likes field in my data source. But when they select option 2, I want you to show them this view, or this instead. So I've created that field, and I've called it selected engagement metric, and I can drag it out onto the view, and I can resort again. And of course, we also want to look at this on the average level. And now when I change this dropdown, the metric shown on the view changes as well. So we just created a very interactive view for our user, and we also did some advanced text-based analysis. And again, to point out, we worked with an advanced data source as well. So we're getting close to finishing up this dashboard. But the last view is our Twitter conversation topics. And I saved this one for last because it looks at the Twitter Firehose. So it's some pretty interesting data. And so the first thing I want to walk you through is basically how this data is structured. So we have a record. Anytime someone tweets with @Tableau Public, a new record gets entered into a database. And then that has information like the author's username, the date and time of the post message, and things like the number of followers that user has. But because we have a record for every single tweet, our number of records field in this data source is actually really, really useful. We can do quite a bit with it. So let's take a look. I'm going to take my number of records, and I'm going to bring that out onto the view. And then I'm going to take my date field here. I'm going to drag it out onto columns, and I'm going to select the aggregation of hour, because I want to look at when people are mentioning us at different hours of the day. I'll go ahead and change this into a bar chart. And then I can do some more things to slice and dice this. So I actually have a weekday filter already set up here. I can show my filter control here. If you wanted to create a weekday filter, you could do simply take your date field, drag it out onto your filter shelf, and you can select the aggregation of weekdays. So now we could look at, okay, when are people mentioning us during the week, for instance? And I think it's pretty helpful to see, when people are mentioning us over different hours of the day. And we've done some beyond the surface date and time analysis here, starting to look at hours of the day and weekdays. But I want to take this to the next level. We've done some text analysis with the contain statement. And I actually have a field in my data source that contains the first hashtag that's in a tweet about Tableau Public. Now, this field is more advanced than the contain statement. It actually uses regular expressions. And again, we don't have time to dive really deeply into them today, but I have in the resources links to community blog posts, code snippets, etc., if you are interested in diving into regular expressions. The thing is, though, things like contain statements and the things that we went over previously can help you do really powerful text-based analysis. And regular expressions can be helpful if you want them as a tool in your back pocket, if you're interested, but they're absolutely not necessary for doing advanced text-based analysis. So let's bring that out onto the view. And there's a lot of noise here, so I'm going to go ahead and exclude any tweet that doesn't contain a hashtag. And I'm also going to sort to look at, or filter by just my top 5 most used hashtags. All right, so what we have here now is the timeline of certain hashtags. So we can see when people throughout the day are using those particular hashtags when they mention Tableau Public. So we've done some text-based analysis here. We've also kind of dug beneath the surface for date and time fields, starting to look at, okay, what's happening on the hour level? How does that change by weekday? But there's more that we can do here that I want to do with our date and time field. And that's creating this time zone adjustment. So as you can see here, I have a UTC adjustment, and that is created with a parameter. I'm going to go ahead and open up that parameter, and you'll probably recognize a couple things about it. So first, we have, properties at the top, and these are the same properties as my previous parameter. But instead of my allowable values being a list, I've selected range. And I can define a minimum and maximum number in my range. So I have -12 to 14 to cover UTC adjustments. And just like the engagement metric, now that we've created the parameter, we need to tell Tableau what to do if the input changes. And we do this with a calculation called date add. And this is one of my favorite calculations for working with social media data. Date add has 3 parts. The first, in orange, defines the date part. That's hours, months, years, the unit for the date. The purple tells you how much of an adjustment you're going to make. So for instance, I could have the number 8 in there. So I'd be telling Tableau to adjust by 8 hours. But I actually have put in the parameter here. So what the user selects for the number is actually the number of hours that it's going to adjust by. And the third part of date add in green simply tells Tableau what date field this applies to. And you'll notice that date field is called date UTC. And that's because in my original data source, my date and the dates come from the Twitter Firehose in UTC. So naming things consistently here, what we've done is we've always labeled across these data sources the time zone that they come in. And then when we apply a time zone adjustment to them, we call all those fields dates, date. So whenever we see the date field, we know that that's been adjusted and that's in the same time zone. So this allows us to look at dates across multiple data sources in a standardized way. And so since I use that date field, if I change that UTC adjustment, I see it adjust on the view. There we go. All right, so we've recreated the missing parts of this dashboard. Now we could do a couple things to format it consistently. So for instance, I'll probably want to format this view very similarly to my Facebook view. So I'm going to go ahead and open up my Facebook view. I'm going to copy my formatting. And I'm going to paste my formatting here. And I'm also going to swap my axes, because that's how we look at it on the other view. And I'll change my color, because we're using orange for Twitter. Now, you might have noticed that there were no axes in the dashboard, and that was really to eliminate visual clutter, because what we're really interested in is the change between the bars. And our tooltips have plenty of information in them about the number of tweets. So I'm going to go ahead and hide my header in this case, so that I'm mimicking that format. So what we've done is we've formatted these two views so that they're similarly formatted. And we could do the same thing up here. But to save time, so we make sure we have lots of time for questions, we're not going to do that. But what have we done here? Well, we've actually, we've looked at 2 advanced types of data, social media data. We've also done some advanced text analysis. We've also done some advanced date and time analysis. The last thing that we can do is really see all of this together. They're all in a dashboard now. And these views draw in total from 4 different underlying data sources. And you saw that we applied a weekday filter to our conversations topic view that we built. And that appears here on the dashboard. And what's awesome about the fact that all of these are on a dashboard now is that I can apply this filter to all of my data sources and all of my views on this dashboard. And this is new to Tableau 10, where we can apply filters across related data sources, not just the data source that we originally built it in. So now, if I want to apply this filter to different views, I can do that without writing any code. Tableau just recognized the common field in my data source. So we've really brought it full picture here, and now we're blending that data together and creating a user-friendly, interactive view. So here's where you could find my resources online. This is case sensitive, so just be attentive to that. I'll leave it on screen for a little longer. One piece of advice I always like to give is I believe that every social media program has, of course, its own unique goals, and there's never a one-size-fits-all solution for social analytics. So my goal today was to provide you with 10 versatile tips that you can apply in a way that makes sense for your program. And always, always iterate. You don't need to have perfection right away. You can apply tips and tricks to level up your social program over time. Please do complete the session survey in the TC app. I'd love to hear your feedback. And I also have some recommended sessions if you're looking to dive into some of the topics discussed today. So we have a session coming up actually later this afternoon that's about interactivity. The Lionsgate session, if you want to hear from a customer that has works with some social media data. And then also tomorrow we have a session on data blending. So with that, I'd love to open it up for questions. Yeah. Oh, data from YouTube? So yeah, you can. So first of all, you can download data from YouTube just right out of the box. But also, I can't remember off the top of my head, but I'm guessing there's probably a web data connector that also incorporates YouTube. So definitely check out those resources. I have a list. There's one data connector on there that connects to a service that has, allows you to connect to multiple sources of web data. So that might be a great place to start. And LinkedIn, you could get LinkedIn data as well. I'm completely forgetting the name, but it's in those resources. And there's one web data connector that it says you can connect to multiple web data sources. And I believe they do LinkedIn, yeah. Yes?
So can you show how we used APIs to connect to Tableau? You mentioned you used APIs to get that data extracted.
Oh, okay. So showing the APIs. So actually, I didn't connect to the API myself. I just connected to a web data connector that was built by another developer. So he coded that all up, the connection itself. But since he published that web data connector and hosted it, he actually has, and I have this in the resources, the link to that web data connector. So I just connected to basically his own connection to that API, and he has a front end for it. So he basically coded this whole way to connect to that data, and I simply use the interface for it.
So without going through that route, you also download the data
Yeah.
So, can you share a little bit more about that?
Oh, yeah. So downloading the data from the website. Yeah, so this one? Yeah, so it can be, for some of these, like they're a little bit hidden, so that's why I wanted to like point out, but I can like walk through these. So first of all, for all of these, you're either going to need to have admin access or you're going to need to be logged into the actual account. But like a lot of them, for instance, or at least for Facebook, you can have like an analyst role on a page. So for Facebook, what we're looking at is I'm logged in as an admin on the page. I go to Tableau's Facebook page and I then see these admin options. And that one that I selected here is Insights. If you click on that tab, there's a button on the top right-hand corner that says Download Data. And basically you're looking for that button in all of them. It just says Download or Export Data. You're just trying to find where it is. Analytics.twitter.com is where you get that Twitter data. You have to be logged in to the Twitter account you're concerned with. Go to analytics.twitter.com and click on the tab at the top that says Tweets, and you're going to get that big export button once you're there. Pinterest, it's actually like right at the top of the page, so that one's not as hard to find. And then YouTube is definitely the most buried. So you need to access the YouTube Creator Studio. So if you're producing content on YouTube, that's your interface for sharing content. So it's just down lower in that Creator Studio. It's that tab at the bottom once you're inside Creator Studio. Yeah. Oh, I think you had your hand up first. Yeah.
Yeah, so if we do the web data connector, does our data become public or is it still private?
Oh, that's a great question. So she asked if we use the web data connector, does your data become public? So it does not. So you're connecting to basically a Tableau connector that someone else has built. And so they've published the web data connector, but if you use it, you're not publishing your data.
Okay, so no one else but me would have access to it even if
Exactly. Yes.
So you're connecting to the pages. What if I'm running a campaign? Can that connector connect to the campaign stuff? Because the data that's in the campaigns is running very different from the campaign.
Yeah. So she asked about campaigns versus the page. So you're referring to like paid campaigns. Yeah. And so I don't have quite as much familiarity with that because I am on the organic side. But first of all, I do know that there is a way to download data in that campaigns page. But when it comes to web data connectors specifically, I haven't seen a web data connector thus far that connects to paid data. Although I certainly would, pose to the community that you'd be interested in that because there's lots of developers who are building pretty cool ones and want to share them with the community. Yes.
I see that in your workbook you use share/retweet.
Yes.
So if you doing free data processing, because Facebook is not going to call it retweets or retweets is not going to call it
Yeah.
shares. So do you have to manually do something so that you become the same column and then?
That's a great question. So she asked, I had a field across my two data sources for Facebook and Twitter that was called shares/retweets. And so all I did there was I brought that data into Tableau and I renamed the field in Tableau. And so what I did there is I created the naming convention ahead of time, but I used Tableau to create all of that metadata. So no pre-processing there.
But then you name two feeds the same thing, right? Like the Facebook data,
Mm-hmm.
Twitter data, both of them cannot be named as shares/retweets.
Yeah. And the reason that I did that is so that we could really easily have that look at both of those data sources together in a single dashboard, and the parameter itself, we could choose likes or share/retweets, and it would be the same interface no matter what. Any other questions? Yes.
Just as a matter of kind of review license for Tableau, do you ever combine this data with other input data sources or other third-party data sources to enhance it or enrich it further? And if so, I kind of wonder what those are.
Yeah, that's a great question. So she asked about blending social data with other data sources. I would say like Google Analytics is my primary use case for doing that. I work quite a bit with Google Analytics data, with our social media data, and particularly like I love to look at like referrals to our website from social media sources. So that's kind of my biggest use case for that. But blending social data like with other data sources is something that I would definitely recommend. And if you're creating like naming conventions, like you're thinking about what you're going to be blending it with, like it can really help you, like naming conventions and that sort of thing can really help you like make sure you set yourself up really well to be able to connect and blend with the other data sources you care about there. Yeah. Yeah.
I have one more question about the web data connector versus like right now, right, you do that download the data from social
Yeah.
media. But would there be any difference or any kind of convenience to use a web data connector except for the fact that I don't have to manually go and download it? But other than that, do I get like some data?
Oh, okay. Good question. So she asked if there's any additional data contained in the web data connector that's not available in the export. I actually don't know. I know that there's a lot of it's very similar. So like when you go into Facebook and you're downloading data from Facebook Insights, you're looking at like the posts themselves. But the API also looks at the posts. And so you're kind of like at the baseline level, like looking at each post and getting engagement metrics about each of them. There might be some fields that are different depending on, but I think another thing is there's like any developer can build a connection to Facebook's API. So what you can access through that particular web data connector might vary based on what they built. So I think the best place to go is just like looking at the documentation on Facebook's website, which will break down like what fields could actually be accessed in their API and see if any of those fields are not contained in the Facebook Insights. All right, well, thank you all so much for joining me. I'll be up here for any further questions as well.